Now, is it really true? Well, the answer to that one is no. Because just like what I told you a while ago, the right and the left hemisphere communicate with each other via the corpus callosum, and that claim is not yet scientifically proven. Next, the cerebrum is also divided into four lobes, namely the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. Frontal lobe is responsible for thinking, memory, behavior, and movement. Temporal lobe is responsible for hearing, learning, and feelings. Parietal lobe, on the other hand, is responsible for language and touch, while the occipital lobe is responsible for sight. Now, for the next part, this is just a picture showing how the different lobes in the brain are arranged inside our cranium. And for the next part of the brain, we have the cerebellum. Cerebellum is the little brain, or also known as the hindbrain. It is located below the cerebrum at the back of the skull, and it is responsible for the coordination of muscles, balance, posture, and muscle tone. The next part would be the brainstem. The brainstem is responsible for connecting the brain and the spinal cord. It is divided into three parts, namely the midbrain, pons, and the medulla oblongata. For the midbrain, it is the portion of your brainstem that is responsible for connecting the hindbrain and the forebrain, or the cerebellum and the cerebrum. So the midbrain is emphasized as the color green on the picture on the right side. The midbrain is responsible for visual and hearing reflexes, and the damage of the midbrain is actually linked to the development of Parkinson's. Next would be the pons. Pons, another part of your brainstem, is responsible for conducting messages to the other parts of the brain. It is also responsible for interpreting reflex actions such as chewing and the production of saliva. Medulla oblongata is the lowest part of the brainstem. It is responsible for connecting the brain and the spinal cord. It is also responsible for most involuntary actions like regulating heartbeat, respiration, swallowing, coughing, and regulating the blood pressure. So there you have it, the central nervous system, and we're not yet done, by the way, with the spinal cord. So for the spinal cord is an organ connected to the brain, and it is linked between the brain and the rest of the body, or the peripheral nervous system. It is also situated inside the vertebrae, or the bones at our back, and we have a total of 31 pairs of spinal nerves. It goes down from the back of the body, starting from the medulla oblongata. It is surrounded and protected by the vertebrae, just like what we have discussed from the skeletal system. And it is responsible for reflex action. It carries sensory and motor messages. So, what are reflex? Reflex are actually quick, automatic, unconscious response based from the immediate stimulus that we have received. And reflex actions are the results of reflex arc. So reflex arc are the shortest nerve pathway that are situated in our spinal cord. So most of the response, or all of the response for a reflex, are actually initiated not in the brain but rather in the spinal cord. One good example would be whenever a doctor make use of orthopedic hammer to stimulate your, or to check if the nerve in your patella or the knee are working properly. Now, the immediate response is not interpreted, or is not coming from the brain but rather from the spinal cord. Next, we have the meninges. Meninges are the covering of the brain. So we have a total of 3 membranes that is responsible for covering the brain and the spinal cord. So those 3 membranes are the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. Dura mater are the thickest and the toughest outer layer of the meninges. Next would be the arachnoid mater. So it was called arachnoid because it looks like web, which is produced by your animals from the arachnida group or the spiders. Pia mater, on the other hand, is the innermost layer with blood vessels to nourish the nerves. So, pia mater is responsible for supplying the nutrients and for the nourishment of our nerve cells. So, this is how they are arranged inside the brain. So, the brain's protective barrier. Next, we have the CSF or the cerebrospinal fluid. The CSF is the clear, colorless, transparent fluid present in the cerebral ventricles, the spinal canal, and the subarachnoid spaces. So basically, the CSF or the cerebrospinal fluid is just the fluid found inside the brain. So it surrounds the spinal cord and fills ventricles within the brains. It's responsible for the blood-brain barrier control, from which the solutes enter the cerebrospinal fluid. So aside from that, it is responsible for serving as a shock absorber to protect the brain and the spinal cord. It is also for carrying nutrients to the different parts of the body, and it helps in removing metabolic products and waste materials. So after the circulation of the CSF, it will be absorbed into the blood vessels of the dura mater for its function. So that's it for the central nervous system. Thank you for listening.